Okay, hello everybody. We are getting ready for our live stream. So I'll give some people a chance to hop on while we get started. Welcome to our Artist Talk with Katie Butler, who will be speaking about her work, Bread and Butter. This work will be on view through August 17th at Akron Soul Train. So you have lots of time to come see it in person. It is really amazing to see all of the detail, all of the little, it's almost like an Easter egg hunt to see what all is in each piece. They're so complex. Our gallery hours are Wednesday through Saturday from 11 to 4. And this summer, on Fridays, we are open from 11 to 7. So you can come downtown and hang out on a Friday night. We'd like to start by thanking our sponsors for making all of this possible. And a quick introduction of Katie. She is an Akron-based painter whose work provides critical commentary of American politics and socioeconomic issues in American society. She has shown prolifically both nationally and internationally in numerous exhibitions and been published numerous times as well. And I'm going to turn my camera around, and there we go.
Hi.
And so maybe give a little introduction to yourself, to the work.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Katie Butler. Thank you for the intro. And I want to just tell you a little bit about my practice as a whole and kind of give like a general overview, and then we can talk a little bit more specifically about this particular series. So I wanted to start with this painting because it's good to illustrate my practice as a whole and kind of how and why I started making work in this vein. This is a painting called 3 Martini Lunch, and that's a reference to sort of the genesis of this work back in 2020. So of course we all remember 2020. It was the pandemic, and I was watching the passing of the first COVID relief bill in I think May of 2020, but don't quote me on that. That was passed by Republicans in Congress under the Trump administration, and it was an emergency situation, so it was very urgent that it would get passed. So it was pretty much guaranteed to go through with speed and little deliberation. So there were a lot of other provisions that were included in that, like huge package. And one of them was the reinstatement of the 3 Martini Lunch tax break, which allowed for very lavish corporate meal expenses to be fully written off. So I was thinking about that phrase and diving into that, and at the same time noticing really long lines at the food bank, and so it was like a very stark visual of visual representation of income inequality, and that was when like a sort of light bulb went off, and I thought food and the still life could be a really good vehicle to talk about income inequality and some of the issues that I'm interested in. So ever since then, the 3 Martini Lunch tax bill, I've been painting at the intersection of food, still life, economics, politics. And that idea of this like starting with a phrase is pretty much how my process goes. So I'm usually listening to or reading the news, and I'll jot down some word or phrase that interests me. It's usually like a food-related metaphor. And then I do some research and try to, tap into art history and try to come up with symbols and form a composition from there. So this particular series, Bread and Butter, came from phrases like bread and butter issues or kitchen table issues, phrases that are ubiquitous in political campaigns, and those are phrases that I've been hearing pretty much every day during the election season. So that was sort of the genesis for this project. And I actually was researching that phrase and making work about this for my thesis show at Kent State a few years ago, but I just hadn't fully figured it out, and it was something that was still in my mind, and I wanted to revisit it this year and nail down the concepts a little bit more and complicate the space in the paintings a little bit more. So this new series I started toward the end of last year, and I've been working on it all year, and it is pertaining to the current election season. I really started it late last year when primary election season was starting to ramp up, and I was watching the ramp up to the Iowa caucuses and noticing politicians going to the state fair and making stump speeches and talking about bread and butter issues and eating hot dogs and trying to be very relatable to like a rural working class demographic, but it often kind of seems a little disingenuous or out of touch when they're running very multi-million-dollar campaigns. So I started thinking about that a little bit more, and I think that campaigns are fascinating because you have this juxtaposition of so many things, the ultra wealthy and lack thereof, high, low, all these different perspectives coming into one playing field, and it's a little chaotic. And so that's something that I try to illustrate in this new work, this like mashing together of money and lack thereof and multiple competing perspectives and views of reality. So yeah, we can kind of go through and talk a little bit more about some of those.
I like how you talked about the multiple perspectives and views of reality, because that's something that you are playing with a lot in the work. Yeah. So, which one do I want to maybe?
Go maybe to this big one to talk a little bit more about that. This one's called Bread and Butter, so it's the namesake of the exhibition and one of the earliest works from this series. And I'm trying to expand the field of depth a little bit more in the painting, and again complicate the space and play around with perspective more. So I have this sort of interior exterior mashup, and these very odd shifts in scale that don't make sense all the time. And I've been using the tabletop as sort of a starting point and skewing or reversing the perspective of it. I've been sort of flattening out some space and using framing devices. The paintings usually start with just basic shapes like that, where I'm trying to play around with perspective and kind of mess things up and collage shapes together, and then I populate it with objects and lots of symbolism.
Yeah. Can you talk maybe a little bit about the stars and some of the symbolism that you've used that we'll kind of see throughout the show?
Yeah, so there's a lot of recurring motifs. I'm thinking about patterns, colors, objects, and there's symbolism in all of that. Some of the patterns and colors come from stately spaces. I toured the Ohio State House last year, so the State House, if you have not been, is actually pink inside the interior. So I pull that color and repeat it throughout the work. Some of the tile work that you'll see throughout the exhibition comes from there. These like arches and this come from the State House. And I also look at White House archives and kind of mine through photos of the different rooms in the White House and congressional buildings, and the Supreme Court buildings. So things like this kind of oval with the star border, that comes from a rug in one of those spaces that I'm, obviously like flattening out and turning into an abstraction. This sort of striped wallpaper, that comes from wallpaper in one of those rooms as well. So I'm pulling from these stately places for colors, pattern, and architectural elements. And then a lot of the objects I have objects that represent wealth and luxury. We're in Ohio, so things like lobster are considered a luxury item. And I have like a little corporate credit card, the little Easter egg, things like flies or mold on the bread that are just like a little bit off, to indicate that there's maybe something kind of gross or unsettling here. And then I have objects sort of on the other end that are more from my everyday life and perspective. And I'm trying to find this sort of like sweet spot of symbolism. Like these plastic chairs, for example, come from like a very specific memory for me, but they're also really universal. I think most people recognize those plastic chairs. So I think that sort of sweet spot of it's got enough specificity to make it interesting, like visually, in a painting, but it's universal enough at the same time. It can be read. So lots of things going on in here. Lots of now it's art history as well. But yeah, I think I'm hoping that the more you look, the more that you find.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. Okay. Where do we want to move to next?
Well, I guess we can move to this one maybe.
Yeah.
It uses some of the same strategies. And you can see, again, this star pattern with this deep red coming in, and those are colors that are pulled directly from the White House. And then this pink again coming from the State House. These arches that are sort of framing another kitchen scene. Something like the gingham tablecloth and those lamps. Again, specific to my own memories and but also and surroundings, but also I think very universal at this point. So I've been playing around a little bit more with these framing devices, this architecture of the picture plane framing another scene.
Yeah, it seems like you have that kind of like a secondary scene or background kind of portal scene and that's like kind of where the everyday life is, or kind of like the everyday person lives, but they're pushed into the back almost.
Yeah. And I'll try not to get too in the weeds. So I was looking at paintings from the Netherlands in the 1400s, early examples of still life paintings by people like, I'm going to pronounce them wrong probably, but Artsen and Bokkelaer, who were making these large-scale, three-faced still life paintings and kitchen scenes, but really radically inverting the scale. So foodstuffs would be really, really large in the foreground, and architecture of the food stands or the kitchen would be framing another scene that's really, really small and kind of obscured and off in the distance. And those paintings they kind of served as like moral and religious commentaries, so they were often biblical scenes in the distance, but they were also definitely commentaries on wealth and class issues at the time. So I just found that like structure, that compositional structure, to be useful and something I wanted to tap into. in those paintings, sort of the criticality comes in to that foreground area of the painting. So things like the food in the front being really large and much more rendered and in focus, but they'll have something like mold on the bread or flies or something that's like a little bit off, and that's where that critical component starts to come in. And then the scenes that are being framed off in the distance are a little bit less detailed. They're much smaller in scale, and they lack some of those unsettling qualities or illuminating hues that you see in the foreground. So yeah, I'm definitely pulling that from those paintings and thinking about how can I use that same compositional strategy in a new way and put it into a contemporary context.
Okay. We
I guess
go
this one
across
too,
the
that does
way.
that as well,
Yeah.
but in a little bit different way. So we can see similar framing devices and different spaces being jammed together. The scale's a little bit different though in this one. And this one I'm starting to play around with a little bit more too, like the breaking of the frame. So some of those scenes that are off in the distance are starting to maybe make their way into the foreground, or vice versa. But it is still a little bit off, or it doesn't quite work. There's something sort of irrational about the space. And that's kind of what I'm hoping happens here. You know, I want it to be a little bit irrational and illogical, and a little unsettling the more that you look. Maybe a little bit chaotic in the way that I'm organizing things, which I think again relates to like the canvas and what we're all watching and experiencing.
Yeah, definitely. Can you talk, I guess, maybe a little bit about your process with getting reference imagery, or do you draw like or paint from the still life?
Yeah, it's just like the painting itself is a mashup. I look at tons of different references and just sort of like try to combine them and piece them together. So it will be photos from the White House archives, or photos that I took somewhere. It'll be photos from like restaurant websites or photos that I take. It'll be photos of still life paintings from the 17th century and 16th century. It'll be things in front of me, like I'll buy flowers and then intentionally kill them a little bit so I can paint them in my studio. Or I'll hold like a wine glass up and paint that. So my studio has a bunch of random objects. But yeah, it's definitely a combination of actual objects, photos that I find or source, photos that I take, and drawing is a really big part of the process. I do a lot of sketching. I make preliminary studies and works on paper before I even get to this part. So that whole kind of research and drawing stage probably takes longer than the painting itself. It takes me a while to get to the composition and figure it all out. So yeah, drawing definitely plays a big role.
Yeah, they're like very incredibly well like drafted. They're like the complex, the use of space that is irrational, but also still looks like it could maybe work.
It's a tricky line to walk. Yeah. And it's fun. I want to have some areas that are like really flattened out, and then some things that are like more realistically rendered. I like that combination. It just aids in this collage aesthetic that I'm trying to get across. And yeah, I was always afraid that people would think that I just didn't know how to. I didn't know anything about perspective. Like I didn't know how to do perspective. But yeah, I definitely like messing it up. first glance it could work, and then the more you look.
Yeah, there's definitely an art to messing it up just enough or enough to make it look intentional.
Yeah,
And
again, it's a weird line. Yeah, I gotta kind of figure out that sweet spot. So.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to go on to something different? Talk about the drawings?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk about the pantry drawings. So these sort of drawings are something that I've been doing since the pandemic, since 2020, and I've just kept it going since. It's an ongoing project alongside the larger paintings. For a lot of reasons, it's just nice to have something like this to do when my brain is working and trying to figure out something in the painting space. And I also think that they give a little bit more context to the work too. I initially started just doing sardine drawings back in 2020 because I was thinking about anxiety and claustrophobia and just these bodies, being close together in public and the anxiety around that. So I started making these sardine drawings, and the repetition of the pattern and the ritual of the drawing also was very comforting during that time. So I've just kept it going ever since because I haven't lost interest yet. And I started expanding into other pantry items this year. So I'm excited about that because I'm incorporating more everyday objects into my paintings. So this is a good way for me to kind of create an arsenal of imagery that I can maybe incorporate into the paintings as well.
Do you have a favorite thing to draw or
I had
item so far?
I had way too much fun with the Wonder Bread. That was a really enjoyable drawing. I love all the folds and creases and the text and the recurring circles. So that one was fun. That's probably going to make its way into a painting at some point. And I mean, some of the primary colors and some of the shapes too, I think will translate really well into the painting space. So I'm excited about that.
What's it like kind of having so many of them together? Because it's almost like that gingham pattern, it just almost looks like a picnic, but in a really strange way.
Yeah, I think that they're better together. That sounds corny, but it's about accumulation, and repetition. So I think that they look good as a grouping. And I kind of challenged myself last summer to just make a bunch of them and put them all up in a grid just so I could actually see them together. And I was really excited about that. And so I wanted to try to do that again here, but with more of a variety of food items and sizes, because usually they're the same size. So here, since I was working with different food items, I was trying to let the food item determine the size of the paper. I wanted to keep them relatively life size.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a new ingredient that came into the process.
I definitely didn't realize that at first, but yeah, they are almost pretty much to scale.
Pretty much. I mean, I don't get too specific with it, but they're pretty much life size. And again, that just determines the size of the paper. A larger scale for something like the bread that just needs more space.
Yeah. No, I think there's something really powerful in something being the size that it is in life and how you approach a drawing or painting as a viewer as well.
Yeah, and especially I think when there's so much about this collage aesthetic. It's this very flat gingham pattern and then this darker, higher contrast, more rendered object in front. It really emphasizes the object.
Yeah.
So it's something that you can kind of imagine and holding in your hand.
You want to talk about any of the other paintings, or?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess we can quickly maybe talk about this one.
Yeah.
Just because this painting uses something that I took from an artist I admire named Marnette Larson, who's a painter, and she employs reverse perspective. So I was doing that to the tabletop and to the space. It's literally just like flipping the perspective. And I got excited about that because when you reverse the perspective in the composition, it switches the power dynamic, I think. And that's seemed to work really well for what I'm trying to convey, like this one in particular, top down, thinking about like trickle down economics and everything being kind of concentrated at the top and dissipating as it gets further below. So that reverse perspective seemed to emphasize that, and so that's something that I'm gonna continue to play around with too. And this like inversion of space too, this sort of upside down.
That was totally gonna be one of my questions. So
yeah.
No, it's so like playful in a way, but it definitely like does provide commentary on very serious, the way that you're talking about it makes complete sense. So I just think it's so interesting visually to come up and be like, oh, is that table upside down? Like, and then you see the space differently.
Yeah, I think this goes back to me revisiting this topic and just trying to complicate the space more, because initially I was thinking so much about food and objects and symbolism there and how that could be used to talk about issues or carry the content, but now I'm trying to just add more ingredients, not to use food metaphors, but how can I use other strategies to carry the content as well?
Yeah, so the perspective kind of has been a newer development or something that you've been
It was something that I always was touching on, but
Yeah.
I wasn't getting that deep into it. I was like playing around with collage aesthetic and flattening space and playing the scale, but there's just so much more that could be done. So I'm excited to just keep, complicating things.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Okay, so maybe I'll do a quick little walkthrough just to see every piece in the show. But I'll do a quick conclusion as I do that. So let me switch back around so that I can get Katie in the picture. Okay. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
For walking us through your work. Just a reminder that you can see this work, Bread and Butter, on view at Akron Soul Train through August 17th. And so make sure you come on by. I'm going to switch the camera around again. We're going to take one more little walk through the rest of the gallery before I close out. Really incredible work. Okay, well, we'll see everyone in the next live stream. Thank you so much for joining us.